for the last 14 months. 10. 10 times. Yeah? I mean, I worked in tax 40 years. I've never seen that, yes?
It's every day in India, by the way.
But India is special, yes? The Indian exception, yeah? So in a sense, I mean, we've moved to a situation where international taxation, taxes that are paid or not paid by multinationals, is very much at the top of the political agenda, yes? And I think that's not a bad thing, because in some ways, tax is at the center of our democracies, no? But what we need to make sure is that the debate, the public debate, is informed. And that's very hard. Because for the NGOs, even a one-liner, Google not paying taxes or Starbucks, not paying tax, it's easy. But then when you have to come back and explain why that is the case, you need 10, 15 pages, not just one line, yes? But I think it's up to all of us in the tax profession to try to educate people so that you can have an informed public debate on this issue. The other thing I think that has happened is that you see that the boards of companies are increasingly discussing tax issues. I mean, there was a survey done in the UK 5 years ago, and it asked how many times had the boards of the top 100 companies discussed tax. 5 years ago, it was once every 2 to 3 years. Some never. Now, keep in mind, tax is the third or the fourth largest cost component of a multinational, yeah? Today, if you ask that same question, I'm pretty sure they would say at least once every 3 months, maybe even more, yeah? So in a sense, the tax directors are getting into the boards much more often. You may not like it, but I mean, that's the reality, yes? So I think things have changed. Why is this debate important from a public policy perspective? The key fact is that for any modern tax system, it can only function if taxpayers comply, or 90% of taxpayers comply for 90% of the time, yeah? You have to have voluntary compliance. You can't enforce compliances. And taxpayers will not voluntarily comply if they perceive, and I emphasize the word perceive, if they perceive that high net worth individuals and multinational enterprises are not paying their fair share of tax. Yeah? So we have an interest in this debate because unless we actually can convince the public, citizens, that everybody is paying their tax, we'll see voluntary compliance diminish, and then we won't be able to operate our tax systems. Is the debate going to go away? I mean, I talk a lot to multinationals these days, and they fall into two categories. There's the ostrich category that says, well, we'll just put our head in the sand and we'll keep a low profile, and a year or two, it'll all move on. It ain't going to happen. Yeah? I think this is Pandora's box that we've opened. We need to engage in it. You need to engage in it because it's going to continue, yes? And that's why I think it's very good to have this as the topic for this discussion here, yes? Perhaps the key question, though, is, but what do we mean by fair tax? How do we decide whether a multinational is paying its fair amount of tax, yes? I mean, I may be old-fashioned, but I say, look, the key question is not whether it's fair or not, it's whether is a multinational paying the right amount of tax at the right time in the right place, huh? That's the key question to ask. But of course, you then get into the issue of, well, what do we mean by right? And frankly, that's an issue for government. Yeah? Government has to set the rules so that they feel comfortable with the outcomes from the way that multinationals apply those rules. One thing that has changed over the last 3 years is that we are moving away from a strict legality perspective on the application of tax laws to asking multinationals to comply with both the spirit and the letter of the law. Yeah? And this was a major change that was made in OECD in 2011. The OECD has a set of guidelines for multinational enterprises. These are not the transfer pricing guidelines. These are guidelines that apply right across the field to all activities of multinationals. And when the OECD revised the guidelines in 2011, they had first they expanded the guidelines, the chapter on tax. Initially it was 1 paragraph, it's now 3 or 4 pages. And part of the agreement we had in 2011 was that governments and multinationals agreed that they must comply with the spirit and the letter of the law. Yeah? Now, I know, deciding on what the spirit is, particularly for lawyers, it's a difficult issue. You may not like it, but that's where we are today. And frankly, is it so difficult to determine what is the spirit of the law? I mean, you can look and you can ask, what was the intent of the legislators? Yes? Is there substance behind a transaction? Yeah? Would this transaction have taken place absent tax? Is it a contrived transaction? Is it just driven by tax considerations? Yes? Is the effective tax rate that you arrive at, is that in some way ethical? Yeah? Is it sustainable? Yeah? Will the CEO be able to defend it in 5 years' time? Yeah? And I think, in fact, that so there are many ways that you can actually interpret what, in practice, we mean by the spirit of the law. And in many ways, you know, all of these questions are getting integrated into this whole question of the GARs, yes? And that's a topic that we'll come to with Michael in a moment's time, yes? What is clear is tax planning will continue. But I think the nature of tax planning is going to change, and there'll be much more emphasis, in fact, on making sure that your tax planning is sustainable, that your tax planning does have substance behind it, yes? And in some ways, I think what I would like to see is that this debate on fair tax leads to a different type of debate between government and businesses, that you actually, you know, have a more constructive dialogue between the tax administration and business, a dialogue that's based on openness, on trust, on a willingness to disclose, where multinationals educate the tax authorities, where tax authorities educate the multinationals in terms of what government is trying to do, because that's the way you build up trust. And to get to trust, you need transparency, yes? As I said yesterday, you know, the 3 T's, tax, trust, and transparency, they have to go together. So what are the implications of this in a sense, you know, for multinationals? I mean, the first thing is that, you know, you should not treat this as a moral issue. I actually think it's a bottom line issue, yeah? Because if you are on the front pages of the Financial Times for not paying tax, for having, you know, 1,250 sort of subsidiaries in tax havens, that's not good for you as a company. That's going to affect your long-term profitability. Why? Because it influences the way that your customers see you. 54% of the population in the UK are no longer buying coffee from Starbucks. Yeah? 54%. Yeah? So you have that. It also influences the way your suppliers perceive you. And it influences the way that government perceives. And don't forget, a lot of companies, you know, government is a big client, yeah? But even more important, it influences the way you employees perceive you as a company, yes? Employees, I think, don't like to work for a company which is in the headlines for not paying tax systematically, yeah? So there are good bottom line reasons why, you know, I think multinationals need to take this issue quite seriously, yes? What are some of the implications, I think, of this fair tax debate? The first is that I think the role of tax directors is going to change. You're going to have to become much more tax diplomats. You can't just be good technicians. You're going to have to be prepared to explain more what your tax strategies are, explain not just in the courts, but also in the public domain, yeah? I think also another practical implication is that I think we have to accept that, you know, tax is just not any cost. It's a different type of cost. It has a social dimension, yes? So even though it's an important cost, we have to treat it differently. A third implication, I think, is that, you know, multinationals should not treat their tax departments as profit centers. And there are, particularly US multinationals, where the tax department is actually seen as a profit center. That's, you know, that's the wrong starting point, yes? And linked to that, you know, if you have bonuses of the top management in a company, where the bonus is determined on a post-tax basis, that's giving the wrong incentives, because for every dollar of tax you save, the CEO gets another dollar of revenue, yeah? All the wrong incentives. And it's no coincidence that companies that have that model have the largest tax departments, yeah? And I'm being serious. Facts. This is not fiction, it's facts, yes? So we need to move away from that, and we actually, I think the OECD should be saying its bonuses should be determined on a pre-tax basis. That sends the right signals. Yes? Another implication is that, you know, boards need to take more interest in tax, because boards will put the effective tax rates in the broader context of how will this affect our reputation and what are the financial implications. Yes? So those are some of the broad implications, I think, that come out of this tax debate. As I said, it's not going to go away. You need to engage. And when I say you, that means all of us in government, in the academic community, and businesses, because we need to try to make a serious effort, in fact, to have an informed debate. And if government